The first thing I remember about that day was how crowded the church was. My father's funeral felt less like a farewell to a man and more like a business conference. Rows of polished suits filled the pews, men I barely knew, shaking hands and whispering about the empire he built. Some even smiled as they talked about his $28 million construction company, as if his death was just another line item in their ledgers. I stood there, his son, but invisible to nearly everyone. They weren't there for him as a father. They were there for him as Graham Reeves, the tycoon. When the will was read, the air shifted. Hello, friends. Before we dive into today's story, please help me grow this channel by subscribing, sharing this video with others, and don't forget to hit that like button. Now, let's get started with our story. My older brother Orrin, the golden child, inherited everything: the company, the estates, even the cars. Then the lawyer turned to me and in front of the entire family handed me a single small envelope. Inside was nothing but a brass key. No words, no explanation. I could hear Orrin's quiet laugh behind me, the kind of laugh meant to sting. "Guess Dad thought you couldn't handle the big stuff," he said under his breath. My mother, Mara, avoided my eyes, gripping Orrin's arm like he was the only son she had left. I clenched the key in my hand so hard it cut into my palm. Humiliation, anger, grief, they all hit me at once. Why would my father, a man who left my brother the empire, leave me with nothing but this? That question consumed me. I left the funeral early, walking away from the voices and the praise and the lies. I drove straight to the one place that still felt like him, his old warehouse. I didn't know what I would find, but I knew this key had to mean something. That's when the story really began. The church smelled faintly of polished wood and wilted lilies. The sound of shuffling feet and hushed voices echoed through the tall arches above us. It should have been a sacred space for mourning, but the atmosphere felt more like the lobby of a hotel during a business convention. Suits in navy and gray filled every row. Men I had seen at company banquets leaned in close to one another, talking in clipped voices about projects, contracts, and deals that no longer involved the man lying in the coffin at the front. My father, Graham Reeves, was many things to the world. He was the man who had built Reeves Construction from a handful of men in a truck into a multi-million-dollar empire. To me, he was the father who stood at the dinner table with his sleeves rolled up, still smelling of concrete and sawdust, his eyes sharp as steel. But as I sat in the second row of the church and watched how everyone else looked at him, I realized how little of that father the world ever really knew. My older brother, Orrin, sat in the front pew like a king assuming his throne. He carried himself with the confidence of someone who had been told his entire life that he was destined to rule. Tall, broad-shouldered, always in control, he was the reflection of everything my father wanted in a son. At least that's how I had always believed it. Even now, with the casket 10 feet away, Orrin looked polished and calm, shaking hands, thanking men twice his age for their condolences. He had the kind of smile that disarmed people quickly, the smile of a man born into power. Our mother, Mara, sat beside him, her face pale and unreadable. She wore a black dress with a string of pearls that caught the dim light, and her hand never left Orrin's arm. She did not look at me once during the service. It was as though she had already decided where her loyalty belonged now that my father was gone. I sat one row behind them, close enough to see the lines around her eyes, but not close enough to feel like I belonged. The lawyer's voice had already shifted the room from grief to expectation. I'll never forget the way he cleared his throat, unrolled the document, and began to read. The words carried weight, each syllable landing like a nail hammered into place. My father's empire, everything he had sweated for, sacrificed for, built with his own 2 hands, was now in the hands of Orrin Reeves. My brother received the company, the properties, the cars, the investments, the legacy. When the lawyer turned to me, the room grew silent. For a brief second, I let myself believe that maybe there was something, some small piece of my father's empire that he wanted me to carry. Instead, I was handed a plain envelope. Inside was a brass key, cold and heavy, with no explanation. The humiliation burned hotter than my grief. I could hear the whispers ripple through the pews. Orrin leaned back slightly, his voice low enough that only I could hear him. Guess Dad always knew who was capable. The words were a dagger, twisting deeper because they sounded exactly like something my father would have said when he was alive. Uncle Lel. My father's younger brother sat at the edge of the row. He had the kind of face weathered by years of hard work. His hands rough, his shoulders stooped, but still strong. When he leaned toward me, his voice was rough but steady. Your father always had his reasons, Calder. Don't be too quick to judge him. His eyes flicked toward the key in my palm as if he already knew more than he was saying. I turned it over in my hand, the brass catching the dim church light. A key. That was all my father thought I was worth. The rage built so quickly I had to bite down hard just to keep it contained. I wanted to stand up, to throw the key at the polished casket, to demand an explanation from the man who had ruled my life with an iron hand. But he was gone, and the silence from that coffin was the loudest answer I'd ever heard. On the ride home, I couldn't hear the condolences, the murmured sympathies, or even the sound of the engine. All I could hear was the echo of that will. The sound of Oren's smirk wrapped in words meant to remind me of my place. I thought back to summers spent at the warehouse where Oren was given blueprints and handshakes while I was told to sweep floors and fetch tools, watch and learn. My father had said countless times, his eyes fixed on Oren while I stood invisible at his side. That memory pressed against me with suffocating weight as I gripped the steering wheel, but something about Uncle Lel's words clung to me. Your father always had his reasons. He was not a man who handed out comfort for free. If he said those words, then perhaps the key meant something. I replayed my father's voice in my mind, stern and unforgiving, but always deliberate. Graham Reeves never did anything without purpose. By the time I reached the house, I knew I couldn't let it go. The key weighed on me like a question I wasn't allowed to leave unanswered. Oren could have his empire, the public praise, the handshake deals, and the glowing obituary. I would take the one thing my father had left for me, however small, and I would find out why. That night, I sat alone in my room, the key resting on the nightstand beside me. I stared at it until the moonlight caught its edge, and I made my decision. If my father wanted me to have this, then I owed it to myself to find out what it opened. The anger was still there, the grief still raw, but beneath it all, for the first time that day, a spark of curiosity burned. My father had left Oren the empire. He had left me a mystery, and mysteries, unlike empires, could change everything. The days following the funeral blurred together, yet one feeling cut through everything: anger. It sat heavy in my chest from the moment I woke until the moment I forced myself to sleep. My father's empire was gone from me before I ever had a chance to touch it, gifted to Oren, like it had always been waiting for him. The mansion, the company, the reputation, all his and me. I was left with a single brass key, as if my father's final act had been to remind me of my insignificance. Everywhere I turned, Oren's name was on people's lips. Men from the company called him the new Graham, praising his decisiveness and natural authority. Even at the house where mourners continued to drop off casseroles and flowers, the conversations gravitated to Oren's future, not my father's memory. I watched him stand near the entryway, shaking hands with a steady smile, nodding gravely like a man already comfortable in his throne. I couldn't stand to be near him. The sight of Oren laughing with the very men who had spoken of my father in the same way made my blood boil. I cornered him once in the hallway away from the crowd. "Think this is funny, don't you?" I asked. Oren raised his brows, not even pretending to misunderstand. "Funny? No, Calder. Fitting. Dad knew what he was doing. He left the company to the son who could keep it alive. He leaned closer, his voice low enough for only me, and he left you a trinket. That tells you all you need to know." I clenched my fists so tight my nails dug into my palms. "You don't know everything, Oren." He smirked, adjusting his tie like my words amused him. "No, but Dad did, and he made his choice." Then he walked away, leaving me burning. That night I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the key again. I turned it over and over in my hand, feeling the ridges bite against my skin. If it were truly worthless, why give it to me at all? My father was deliberate to the point of obsession. Every decision he made had a reason. The thought echoed what Uncle Lel had said in the church: "Your father always had his reasons." I decided I needed answers. The next morning, I drove out of town. The further I got from the house, the lighter I felt, though the anger still pushed me forward. The road wound through quiet industrial districts until the familiar silhouette of my father's warehouse appeared. It stood like a relic from my childhood, the place where my summers had been spent sweeping sawdust from the floors, while Oren walked the site with Dad, learning how to negotiate, how to lead, how to command respect. To me, the warehouse had always felt like a prison, a reminder of everything I wasn't. Now it felt like my only hope. I parked beside the rusted chain-link fence and stepped out. The building loomed, its corrugated walls faded, the once bright Reeves construction sign now dull and peeling. The lock on the front door was old, scarred from years of use. My hand shook slightly as I pulled out the brass key and slid it into the lock. The metal clicked with surprising ease, as if the key had been waiting for me all along. Inside, the warehouse smelled of dust and oil. Rays of light cut through the high windows, illuminating workbenches, scattered tools, and piles of unused materials. Every corner carried memories. I could almost see myself as a boy, broom in hand, watching Dad and Oren pore over blueprints while my father's voice boomed through the cavernous space. Pay attention, Oren. One day this will all be yours. The bitterness returned with full force. I walked deeper, my boots echoing on the concrete floor. The warehouse was lined with storage units, metal roll-up doors, each one numbered. My pulse quickened as I scanned them, running my fingers along the cool surfaces until I reached one near the back. The numbers painted above it had faded with time, but the key felt heavier in my pocket as I stopped in front of it. I tried the lock. It resisted at first, then gave way with a sharp click. My hands trembled as I crouched down and slid the key back out. The metal door groaned as I pulled it upward, the sound echoing through the warehouse like a warning. At first I saw only darkness, then shapes began to emerge in the dim light, rows of duffel bags stacked neatly from floor to ceiling. My heart pounded as I stepped inside and unzipped the nearest one. Bundles of cash stared back at me, the edges crisp and the green almost glowing. My breath caught in my throat. I reached for another bag. The same result. Money, more than I could comprehend, stacked in tight bricks. My mind raced. This was not the fortune the lawyer had spoken of. This was something else, hidden, secret, far beyond what anyone had mentioned. Why would my father keep this from the family? Why would he leave this to me? And then I saw it. On top of the highest stack of bags sat an old video camera. A faded sticky note clung to it with 2 words scrawled in my father's handwriting. Play me. I froze, my breath shallow. The cash alone was staggering, but the camera felt heavier than everything else in the room combined. My father's voice might still exist on that tape. The man who had ignored me, belittled me, overshadowed me with Oren. He had left me something, and this was it. The anger that had carried me to this warehouse shifted into something else. Suspicion, fear, a strange flicker of hope. Whatever was on that tape would either destroy the little I still believed about my father, or finally explain why he had chosen me and not Oren for this secret. The storage unit felt like a vault sealed off from the rest of the world. Dust hung in the air, catching faint beams of light from the warehouse windows. The stacks of duffel bags filled with cash pressed in around me, but my eyes kept returning to the old video camera perched above them. The sticky note with 2 words, play me, was more powerful than the millions at my feet. My heart hammered as I reached for it. The plastic casing was worn, the buttons scuffed from years of use. It felt heavier than it should have, as if it carried not only my father's voice, but his final judgment. I hesitated. The anger that had driven me here burned alongside a new kind of fear. What if this tape confirmed everything I had believed about my father? That I was unworthy? That Oren was the only son who mattered? What if this was his last way of reminding me of my place? I sat down on a wooden crate in the corner of the unit, clutching the camera like it might bite. My hands shook as I searched for batteries and a charger, and I found them tucked neatly inside a small metal toolbox on the floor. Of course, my father had planned ahead. He had always been a man who thought 5 steps further than everyone else. The realization unsettled me. This was no accident. He had wanted me to find this, As I worked to get the camera running, flashes of memory forced themselves into my mind. Summers spent here in this very warehouse. Orrin standing tall beside our father, while I swept sawdust from the floor. The sting of sweat in my eyes as I carried heavy beams ignored, while Orrin was praised for memorizing measurements. My father's voice calling me careless, slow, unfocused, every word carved deep grooves in me that had never healed. I gritted my teeth. If this tape held more of that, I didn't know if I could bear it. The screen flickered to life, a dull gray glow against the dim storage unit. I hovered over the play button, my thumb trembling. That small button felt like the line between the life I'd always known and whatever truth my father had hidden. I could almost hear Orrin's mocking voice in my head. "You'll never measure up, Calder." I clenched my jaw and pressed play. The screen stayed black for a moment, and I thought the tape might be blank. Then the image appeared. My father sat at his office desk, the same heavy oak one that now belonged to Orrin. His shoulders seemed broader on the screen, his presence commanding even through a faded recording. But his face was older, tired, the hard edges softened by something I had rarely seen in him. Weariness. I almost stopped the tape then, unable to face what might come. But I forced myself to keep watching. He cleared his throat, his voice deep and deliberate. "Calder, if you're watching this, then I'm gone and you're standing where I once stood." The sound of my name nearly knocked the breath from me. He had said my name directly, not Orrin's, not both of ours together, "I know what you're feeling," he continued. "Anger, betrayal, confusion. I left you little in the eyes of the world and I did it on purpose. Your brother Orrin now carries the empire because he's exactly like me. Ruthless, ambitious, driven to win at any cost. That's what Reeves Construction requires to survive. But it's not what I want for you." The words twisted inside me. My father's voice, the same voice that had so often cut me down, now spoke with a clarity that unsettled me. I tightened my grip on the camera, afraid to miss a word. "This money, you see, is not part of the company. It's what I kept hidden. Away from the books, away from the government, away from Orrin. It's enough to make a man powerful, on his own. I didn't give it to your brother because he would waste it on feeding his pride. I'm giving it to you because you have something he doesn't." I swallowed hard, my throat dry. I wanted to scream that he was wrong, that he had never seen anything in me worth praise. Yet his voice kept pressing into me, steady and unyielding. "You notice people. You see things others overlook. You may not believe it, but I always saw that in you. While your brother fought to be seen, you paid attention to what was real. That's why I trust you with this. You can walk away and leave it here, or you can use it to build something better than I ever did. The choice is yours. Calder." The screen flickered, then went black. The tape ended. I sat frozen, the silence in the storage unit deafening. My chest rose and fell in heavy bursts as his words replayed in my mind. For the first time in my life, I had heard my father acknowledge me not as a failure, but as someone different, someone deliberate, someone trusted. The anger that had pushed me here shifted into something far heavier. This wasn't just an inheritance, it was a responsibility. My father had placed in my hands a fortune that could corrupt me if I became like Orrin, or change me if I chose another path. I looked around at the duffel bags again. Each one was filled with the potential to alter lives, to build, or to destroy. My hands trembled as I zipped the nearest bag shut and set the camera gently on top. This was my turning point. I could leave this warehouse, return the key to my pocket and pretend none of this existed, or I could claim the secret my father had trusted only to me, and step into a role no one expected me to fill. As I lowered the storage door back into place, the metal groaning with finality, I knew I had to decide, and once I did, there would be no going back. I left the warehouse that night with the weight of my father's words pressing down on me harder than the key ever had. The city lights blurred as I drove home, my hands tight around the steering wheel, my mind replaying every phrase from that recording. He had trusted me, he had seen something in me I never believed he did, but he had also placed a choice in my hands that felt impossible. By the time I pulled into the driveway of my mother's house, The anger that had fueled me since the funeral had shifted into a storm of questions. What did it mean to build something better than he ever had? What would Oren do if he discovered the truth? Could I even keep this a secret? Or would the weight of it crush me? I stepped inside to find Oren in the living room with Mara. The air was heavy with the scent of coffee, though neither of them touched their cups. My mother sat stiffly in her chair, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Oren leaned back on the couch, relaxed and smug like a man already used to being in control. "You disappeared earlier," Oren said, his eyes narrowing as he looked at me. "Where did you go?" "Out," I replied. My voice was sharper than I intended, but I didn't care. "Out," he repeated, smirking, still sulking over the will. "You should accept it. Calder Dad made his choice. Maybe he did," I said, my hand instinctively brushing the key in my pocket. "But you don't know everything." His smirk faltered slightly. Mara looked between us, confusion in her eyes. "What are you talking about?" she asked. "Nothing," I said quickly, shaking my head. I wasn't ready. Not yet. The secret was mine. And for the first time in my life, I had something Oren didn't. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake in the dark, the glow of the streetlight casting long shadows on my wall. Every choice replayed in my mind like a battle I couldn't escape. My father's voice echoed through me, steady and commanding. "You notice people. You see things others overlook. That's why I trust you." At dawn, I drove back to the warehouse. The streets were quiet, the world not yet awake. The key slid into the lock again, and the heavy door rattled upward. The sight of the cash-filled bags hit me with the same force as before. Only this time, I wasn't just stunned, I was ready. I set the video camera on the crate and pressed play again. My father's tired face filled the small screen, his voice echoing through the unit. "The choice is yours." Calder, I paused the tape and stared at the frozen image. This was the man I had spent years resenting, the man whose approval I chased but never caught. And here he was, trusting me with something that could change everything. For the first time, I realized this wasn't about the money. It was about the responsibility. The decision solidified in me. I wouldn't run from it. I wouldn't let Oren's sneer define me. This secret was mine, and I would use it to carve my own path. But as I zipped one of the bags shut, I heard the sound of a car door slam outside. My chest tightened. I peered through the dusty window and saw Oren's black sedan parked by the fence. His tall frame moved toward the warehouse. His stride confident. Panic surged. How had he found me? Did he follow me? The door creaked open and Oren stepped inside. His eyes scanned the warehouse, sharp and suspicious. "I knew you were hiding something," he said. His gaze landed on the storage unit door, still open, and then on me, standing among the duffel bags, his face hardened. "What is this?" he demanded. I stood my ground, the key still in my pocket, my heart pounding. "It's what Dad left me." Oren's eyes darted to the cash, then back to me. His lips twisted into a snarl. "You think this belongs to you? You couldn't handle sweeping the floors, Calder. Dad knew I was the one meant to carry everything. Hand it over." "No," I said firmly. My voice surprised even me. It carried a strength I'd never heard before. Oren stepped closer, his fists clenched. "You always wanted to believe you. Mattered. You didn't, Dad. Made me his heir for a reason." I pulled the camera off the crate and held it out. "Then listen to him. Yourself." Oren's face shifted with uncertainty. He hesitated, then snatched the camera and pressed play. My father's voice filled the warehouse, echoing against the metal walls. "Oren is too much like me. Ruthless, ambitious, blind to people. I cannot trust him with this." The words hung in the air like thunder. Oren froze, his face draining of color. For once, his confidence cracked. He stared at the screen as our father's voice continued. Speaking of me, of trust, of choice. When the tape ended, silence followed. Oren's jaw tightened, his fists shaking. He was wrong, he spat. He was old, tired, losing his mind. He never understood what it takes, but I saw it in his eyes. Doubt, fear. The same fear that had lived in me my whole life now lived in him. I stepped closer, my voice steady. "He trusted me, Oren, not you. That's the truth whether you accept it or not." For the first time, my brother had no response. He looked at me with a mixture of rage and disbelief, then stormed out of the warehouse, the door slamming behind him. I stood alone in the silence, surrounded by the fortune and the weight of my father's words. My chest heaved, my hands still trembling, but I knew something had shifted forever. For the first time, I wasn't the shadow, I wasn't the overlooked son, I was the one chosen, and nothing could take that away. The warehouse was silent after Oren's footsteps faded. My breath came heavy, the echo of my father's words still circling the room. The bags of cash loomed around me. The camera rested on the crate, and the key burned in my pocket. I felt like I had stepped out of one life and into another. For years, I had carried the weight of being second best. Every time I stumbled, my father pointed it out. Every time Oren succeeded, he praised him like the sun rose and set on his shoulders. I thought that pattern would follow me to the grave. But in that moment, as I stood in the place my father had deliberately prepared for me, I realized he had been watching me more closely than I knew. I left the warehouse with my head high, something I had never done before. The anger that had driven me there had burned away, replaced with determination. Oren might control the company, the name and the empire, but I carried something far heavier. My father's final trust back at the house. My mother noticed the change. She looked at me with cautious eyes, as if she sensed a shift she couldn't explain. Oren avoided me. He spoke less, his usual smugness replaced by a brittle edge. He knew the truth now. Even if he refused to say it out loud, my father's words haunted him as much as they guided me. I returned to the warehouse again and again in the days that followed. Each time I looked at the cash and felt the weight of choice pressing down on me, I could walk away, leave it hidden forever, or I could use it to build something new. Not an empire like Reeves' construction, built on steel and stone, but something grounded in the trust my father had finally shown me. The money itself no longer scared me. What scared me was becoming the man my father had warned me about. I had seen what blind ambition did to him and to Oren. Didn't want to repeat that cycle. I wanted to honor my father in a way that meant more than profit and contracts. I started small. I took a single bag and used it to help workers who had been loyal to Reeves' construction for decades but were suddenly left behind under Oren's rule. Men with broken backs, families struggling to pay for medical bills, young apprentices who needed a chance. My father had built his empire on their sweat, and now it was time someone remembered them. Each step I took with that money, I felt closer to the man my father had seen in me. I realized the key he had given me wasn't just for a lock. It was for a door I had never believed I could open, a door to my own worth. Oren tried to corner me again weeks later. He warned me that meddling with the company's people would only make things worse, but his words lacked the fire they once had. For the first time, he knew he couldn't control me. My father's voice had cut deeper into him than he would ever admit. The warehouse became my sanctuary. It wasn't just a hiding place for cash. It was a reminder that sometimes the things left in shadows carry the most meaning. My father had left the empire to Oren, but he had left me something greater, a chance to build on my own terms. The lesson I carry is simple. Value is not always in what the world sees. It's often in the quiet trust someone places in you when no one else is watching. My father had not been perfect, and he had left scars that would never fully heal. But in the end, he gave me something that no empire could replace. Looking back now, I understand why he made the choices he did. Oren needed the empire because he couldn't survive without it. I needed the key because I was meant to create something that belonged only to me. As I close this story, I can tell you one truth that I had to learn the hard way. Sometimes the greatest inheritance is not land, money, or titles. Sometimes it's responsibility, the weight of choice and the chance to be seen for who you really are. That was the gift my father left me. If you found this story powerful, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Comment below and let me know what you would have done if you were in my position. Would you keep the money hidden or use it to start something new? And make sure you subscribe to the channel for more stories like this. Your support helps me bring you more of these real, raw, and unforgettable journeys.